On behalf of British Blind Sport, I'm delighted to be joined by a very special guest today on our Golden Legacy series, Her Royal Highness The Duchess of Edinburgh. Her Royal Highness is a full-time working member of the royal family, splitting her time between her work on behalf of the King across the UK and the Commonwealth, as well as her role as patron of over 70 charities and organisations. The Duchess's work reflects her wide range of interests, including the impact global conflicts have on women and girls, and the positive role women have in building peace and resolution. Her Royal Highness is also passionate about encouraging sustainable food supply practices and supporting people with disabilities, including the wider sight loss community and the elimination of avoidable blindness, which she has been deeply committed to for many years. During our conversation, we will touch on the various organisations the Duchess supports, including the role sport and physical activity has in empowering people with disabilities, as well as the progress that has been made and continues to be made in disability sport today. We hope you enjoy this episode. Your Royal Highness, thank you for joining us today. In the introduction, I highlighted some of the work that you're known for. It'd be wonderful to start by hearing how you see your role and the areas that you focus on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My role, as with all members of the family, is to primarily support the King and the monarchy. That is one side of the focus. But also we're lucky enough to be able to fulfil a lot of our passions and our interests. And these, over my time as a member of the royal family, have developed. One of the things that I'm doing now, very much on women, peace and security. In the world, we have the most incredible women who work within communities. They're at all levels of society, and they are often the front line of ensuring that peace is secure, that their communities are looked after, and also we try and get them around the peacekeeping tables as much as possible. And then aside from that, also the very sad problem that the world is dealing with, the issue of conflict-related sexual violence. So I spend quite a lot of time going to difficult countries, trying to highlight the work that's going on there, the problems that they are facing, and also trying to highlight some of the good practice that exists out there. And then also global blindness, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute. Also the world of disability and food security as well. So actually food security probably again relating to conflict areas where you've got a lot of people who are struggling to stay in where they live and growing the food that they need to. So if that population moves, then they become very vulnerable. A lot of the women and girls and children are subjected to trafficking. Then closer to home, the issue of trying to make sure that young people know where their food comes from. I'm fortunate enough to be president of an organisation called LEAF, and they do a lot of education in schools, helping to raise the profile of food and farming and the numbers of opportunities that there are in there, but also helping children to really understand where their food is coming from, how it is sourced, how it is grown, and helping them to connect much better. It's important that we do what we can to try and help children to look up and look out.
Look up and look out. I like that. You mentioned global eye health, and I know that you're very passionate about the prevention of sight loss. What areas of eye health are you involved in, and what type of work do you do there?
This is an area I've been involved in for quite some time now. And when I first got involved in it, the figures globally, the trajectory of people going blind was off the scale. And then over time, those numbers have reduced significantly because people's awareness of avoidable blindness. And if you think that 85% of people who lose their sight, they lose it unnecessarily. And the treatments that are out there are cost effective, also very treatable. If you get the treatment out to people, they will either regain their sight or they won't lose it. It's a matter of scale. And it's a matter of commitment. So I've been very lucky over the last couple of decades to be working in this area. I've been able to travel the world to see some of the amazing work out there that has been brought to many, many people across all levels of society, but particularly in developing countries, to get them the treatments available. And specifically across the Commonwealth, when Queen Elizabeth, when it was her Diamond Jubilee, there was a wonderful trust that was created, and I was really fortunate to be invited to be vice patron. It was the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Trust Fund. And I went around quite a number of Commonwealth countries, seeing the work that was being done, the wonderful magic that having the Queen behind this impetus and the trust, and she wanted 85% of that money to go into avoidable blindness issues around the Commonwealth. Often in many countries, it was the first time that those governments had really gone, this is something that we can do. It's going to require a certain effort, but it can be done. And then when one country, we were particularly focusing on issues like blinding trachoma and diabetic retinopathy and retinopathy of prematurity. It's taken me a little while to be able to say all of those words. And cataract as well. And they've particularly focused in those areas. And the outcomes have been extraordinary. A number of the Commonwealth nations have been able to declare themselves trachoma-free. And the impact for people to regain or not lose their sight has been significant. I've been fortunate to sit with people who have had cataract operations or trachoma operations the previous day, and to see their bandages being taken off, and suddenly people who haven't been able to see for 20 years have suddenly got their sight back. It's not acceptable that people think, this is my lot, I'm going blind, I have to accept it, when something can be done. And it can be done so simply. And that is the beauty of this kind of activity. But as I say, it's a matter of funding and scale.
It's interesting what you say about early intervention could stop the problem exacerbating or the sight loss getting worse. And actually, if you think about what the cost is to support that person, if they haven't got sight, when we've done the early intervention, they may have had sight, and the balance is getting it right at the beginning, isn't it?
It's exactly right. The reality for somebody living in a small village in the middle of Malawi or somewhere in India, the reality is that if somebody can't see, they can't work. And that impacts the whole family, because you then have to have somebody else to look after that person. And that means that two people can't work. And when literally every single penny counts, that has a dramatic effect. I met a man in India who had been selected from the community, and this man had been homeless for many, many years, and he was completely blind. And they brought him in, and they did actually quite an unusual operation on him. They put hubcaps in replacement of his irises, and he had terrible cataracts. And I saw the operation, which was quite fascinating, watching them stitching these hubcaps into his eyes. The next day, he could see, and he hadn't been back to his family for years, because he took himself out of the family, and he had been literally living hand to mouth on scraps for years, and suddenly he could see. And honestly, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I mean, he was just praising God, and he was in tears. I think everybody was in tears, to be honest with you. It was quite magical. That was a slightly more unusual operation, but to be honest, the effect for everybody else, it's exactly the same.
What you just said about someone who hasn't got sight loss, then there's a chance that they won't work. Did you know that 3 out of 4 people with sight loss in the UK are unlikely to be in work? So then you've got the support around that, particularly for parents and children with sight loss. You know, it might mean that mum or dad can't even work, or may have to work part-time. I call it the community economy impact, because the actual long-term impact isn't just about medical treatment, it's about the impact on a whole family. It's about the impact on the economy. If a family hasn't got money to spend, then they're not going to go out, they're not going to be spending more in their local economy, and that affects more than just the family itself. Going back to sport, some sight loss unfortunately is not avoidable. But we want people with sight loss, whether it's avoidable or not, to actually go out and be healthy and fit and enjoy their lives. It fits nicely into the other charitable areas that you support, particularly in the areas of sport and disability, because I know that you do some great work there. Could you share some of that with me?
Absolutely. Well, everything you've said is completely right, and we don't want our communities and our families to be impacted negatively. And this is where sport plays such an important role. And having something like sight loss or another kind of disability is exactly what the word says. It's disenabling, and it's such a negative word. But sport is about enabling. And I think whether or not you are born with a condition that might be immediately apparent or will degenerate over time, or through accident or illness might create the disability, blindness or physical. I think sport offers the opportunity when your world is closing in on you. It actually opens it out again. And then it's not about what you can't do, it's about what you can do. And I think it's not the impact, it's like the pebble in the pond. The impact for the individual who is the pebble is huge, but actually the ripple effect on the family and those that support them is also huge, because suddenly that person for whom the focus has been very central, very closed and often quite cosseted, suddenly becomes, actually, we can support this person to be freer, to be more independent, which is what probably most people want. So I'm lucky enough to be involved with a number of different organisations. I love my work with guide dogs for the blind, for instance, because again, that's about enabling people to live a full and active life. And we just talked about the cost to families, the cost to communities. This is where you suddenly get an opportunity. And the fact that somebody who is blind doesn't have access to the working environment doesn't seem to make any sense. Every single person has got the opportunity to make an impact and to make a contribution.
At British Blind Sport, we've got 12 staff, and 3 of our staff have actually got sight loss, and all 3 of them have got quite severe sight loss. And British Blind Sport believes that we have to practice what we preach for a start. It's about looking at the person's capabilities rather than disabilities and ensuring that they are the right person for the job. And in our case, all 3 are definitely the right people for the job. We hear often from other employers that, and to be fair, I would say that the sports sector is quite an open sector really, but we hear from other employers that it's quite difficult to employ somebody with sight loss, and we know that that's not true. That's actually down to perception. It's down to practicalities, because there's access to work, there's screen readers, there's particular keyboards, and once you've given people with sight loss the right tools, and that goes back to sport as well, obviously. You can give them the right ball, you can show them adaptive equipment, you can actually watch people fly. Mm-hmm. I've actually been doing my job for 15 years, and I could sit here, and I'm sure I haven't got enough time, and I could tell you story after story, a bit like the man who suddenly got his sight back. A good story is, I had a 15-year-old boy once who, unfortunately, through a brain tumour, lost his sight, and he didn't want to come to our football. He didn't want to do any sport, actually. He felt very isolated and withdrawn. But his mum literally dragged him there. And his mum, by the way, she was in a wheelchair. So mum already had her own disability going on. But she was determined to show her son that there is life beyond actually your acquired disability. So he turned up at this football event, didn't want to participate, not happy. And I said, look, I'm going to lead you to the pitch and I'm going to support you. To cut a long story short, he was participating alongside other young boys his age, some who had no sight whatsoever and some that were partially sighted. And he suddenly was amongst his peers, and I couldn't get him off the pitch. And that was showing him his capability and not his disability.
Absolutely. At the Paris Olympics, I saw blind football for the first time. Before we went, I couldn't quite understand how it was going to work, but it does. And it's quite entertaining. One of my favourite games to watch, though, is goalball. I think it's brilliant. The first time I ever saw it, I think, was at one of the Commonwealth Games. And again, it was something, everybody said, have you seen goalball? No, I haven't seen it. And of course, you get in there and it's really intense because, of course, no one's allowed to speak whilst they're actually playing the match. And it's only in between, once they've scored a goal, that everybody can kind of release a bit of emotion. But then you have to go, shh, quiet, because obviously they need to hear the bell in the ball. I really enjoyed it.
What role, ma'am, do you think sport plays in empowering people with a disability, particularly those who are blind or partially sighted?
Again, I think it's about opening out the world and actually allowing other people to see what they can do. It's very empowering. And I don't think I need to explain it any more than that. I think the more people that get the opportunity, the better. And actually, well, it's not just about empowering. It's actually also about physical health. If you don't get the opportunity, and I'm including anybody with a disability here, sport is really important. Exercise is really important. The release of endorphins is terribly important to our well-being. And I know that a lot of people with sight loss and also with other forms of disability suffer from sometimes quite poor mental health issues. And that's because their world has come in on them, and they're not being given the opportunities that they need to get out and experience life as it should be and as it could be. This should be an equal world, and the fact that they struggle to access some of these things is a shame.
And the barriers could so easily be removed, couldn't they? I mean, like travel, sometimes the cost, the equipment, the perception. So if you've lost your sight when you were young and you've been told in a school setting, you just sit on the bench because we don't know what to do with you, then you're going to grow up as an adult thinking, well, I don't do sport, or sport's not for me. And I always say, and trust me, I'm not a sporty person, although I do like spectator sport, but I always say that sport is the springboard for change, because it creates what you've just said, the health properties for people with sight loss, friendships, confidence building, and it's particularly helpful for people with sight loss around spatial awareness. It massively grows confidence, and it's about people making friends. I think the figure, and I'm not quite sure here, but it's possibly over 70% of people with sight loss feel that they're isolated. So sport breaks down that barrier and makes people feel that they're part of something. You've been involved with disability sport for several years. Where do you think you've seen the most progress in that area?
Probably access, but actually more to do with the visibility of. I think back to the London Olympics 2012, and that really was the first time that we saw parasport on the same level as able-bodied Olympics. Actually, I think there's a statistic out there, and I could be wrong, so don't quote me, but I think that there were more people who got to see the Paralympics physically than the able-bodied. And actually, I remember when the ticketing came out and everybody was it was the lottery, and everybody's going, I didn't get to see this, but they'd been given a ticket to go and see some of the parasport. And actually, to be honest with you, they absolutely loved it. And I think also it was, although the Commonwealth Games for many years, and that's been one of the best examples of parasport alongside able-bodied sport, and that was totally integrated, but obviously the size of the Olympics precludes that. But it doesn't matter, because actually the Paralympics is a festival in its own right, and this really was the first time I think that we really were given the opportunity to see our para-athletes on a platform that was commensurate with able-bodied sportsmen and women. And that was really exciting. And the whole feeling around it was truly thrilling. And everybody just got to see incredible sport. And you don't have to watch parasport for very long to... It's not that you don't see the disability, it is there, but you're actually just watching great sport.
British Blind Sport actually hosted the IBSA World Games in 2023 in Birmingham, and IBSA is the International Blind Sports Federation. One thing that we wanted to do was make the athlete be at the heart of all of our team. So when we set up the LOCOG, the Local Organising Committee, we ensured that people with lived experience were on the panel. And I remember saying to Dave Clark, who at that point was actually with the RNIB, but now is the CEO of British Paralympic Association, which obviously the Duke is a part of.
Absolutely, yes.
I said to Dave, what do you want to see come out of this event? And he said, I don't want it to be a celebration of disability. I need it to be a celebration of sport, and that the disability is secondary to that. And that really rang with me for a long time. And we wanted to make sure that when we put on the games, that it was a celebration of sport. It goes back to what you and I talked about earlier about capability, not disability. When I watch goalball or when I watch blind football, actually when I watch any of the sports, I'm there to support the team, the individual. And the disability, it's not that it's not there, and it would be mute to say that it wasn't, but it does become secondary, doesn't it? And it's about that person's capabilities.
Yes, I saw the first time I got involved, because I'm patron of wheelchair basketball. Yes. And the first time I saw a game, and I had somebody sitting next to me explaining all sorts of different things, because obviously there's different categories of disability in the whole team. And so I had all of that being explained to me, which actually, to be quite honest with you, is really interesting. And I think sometimes it's actually quite important to understand the dynamics of what is actually going on, because it can be quite confusing as well, particularly when you've got people of different categories. And I think actually these days, I think the commentators are pretty good at actually trying to explain that to the general public who are watching. But after a relatively short period of time, you stop watching the wheelchairs. You're just seeing people playing a really exciting game of basketball with a skill set that is incredibly challenging. And I know that because I've tried it myself. It's quite one of the most impossible things I've ever done. I don't know whether have you ever sat in a wheelchair?
I have sat in a wheelchair, but I haven't actually tried to play wheelchair basketball.
No, well, I'm not sure I recommend it because it's really hard. You've got the outside ring on the wheel, which is obviously secured to the wheel with little metal struts. That really hurts if you get your fingers trapped in it. And as soon as you start turning the wheels, that's exactly what happens. Then you've got to catch a ball, and then you've got to throw it either as a chest pass as hard as you can, which if you're not used to doing that, can be, you work your way up to that one. But if you try and shoot through the hoop, I used to be a netball player, so I'm not a basket. But the angle of your hand has to be quite far back, and you're actually sort of pushing it up. My hand doesn't do that, so that was really hard. So you're disappearing off into the bundy whilst trying to throw the ball, and then of course you try and turn the wheel. And when you turn the wheel, you whip round. The fact, that obviously, you're strapped in, thank goodness, because otherwise I think I would have come out. But the skill set is enormous. And by the way, they're shooting through a hoop which is at the same height as able-bodied, and bearing in mind most of the people who are able-bodied playing this game are about 7'5". It doesn't make any sense to me that they don't raise their hoop, because it doesn't seem to be a level playing field on that one. But they are at the same height, and so the skill is extraordinary. And when you see them catching the ball and their reach and their dexterity, I think it's one of the most exciting games. And actually, I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, I actually find watching wheelchair basketball a lot more exciting than watching able-bodied basketball.
You won't get into trouble. You certainly won't get into trouble with me. Just bringing that back to sport with sight loss as well. I know that when we did a team day, we did it alongside Goalball UK, and we wanted staff to actually have that sort of lived experience for a moment or two. So we asked them to put a blindfold on and then go on the goalball pitch. Knowing that this ball is coming towards you with full of ball bearing and weighs an absolute ton and is hurling at you at great speed, you are going to worry that it's going to hit your face, that it's going to hit your body and hurt you, because you're lying on the floor. If you add to that somebody who's never had sight and walks in and someone says to them, there's a court in front of you and the goalposts are this big and I'm going to give you a ball, and someone's going to throw it at you and you're going to have to throw it back. That is an absolute leap of faith for people with sight loss, isn't it? And I'm sure it's the same for people in wheelchairs as well. What we've got to say is that we've got your back, and we're going to try and we're going to help you wherever we can.
I would agree with that, and I'd be interested to know what your listeners would think about this. But I would say for somebody with sight loss, especially if they've had sight loss all their life, what would their perception be? Because you are putting yourself in that position as somebody who sees how fast something is travelling at 70 miles an hour and understands all of that, whereas the understanding of what they're going into as somebody without sight is probably entirely different. So I would challenge that to say, well, actually, is there possibly, yes, you're completely right, you've got to trust and you've got to have courage. And this is where, looking at all of these sports, you look at the level of difficulty that people are facing to have to overcome their disability, whether it be blindness or whether it be another form of disability. The level of trust and confidence and courage and skill. And this is where I'm sure you've seen people blind skiing. I mean, talk about trust and confidence. That is something to behold. So impressed when I see them doing this, and actually their partnership. And that often with some of the disability sports with blindness, you have a partnership with somebody that is based on trust. I mean, obviously they have the person who is leading them, they have to be very, very capable, but it's more about trust, I would say. But the skill sets are so strong, and that's why watching parasport, I think, is so intriguing for lots of people to see, because it is so much more, you've got the dynamic of the sport, and that's not taking away from people who are able-bodied at all, because everybody puts their all into it, and of course you have to if you're going to be at the top of your sport. But actually there is so much more at play.
It's an extra layer.
I think it's probably more than one extra layer. I think it's quite a lot of extra layers. But that, and also taking it right down to grassroots level. Again, taking a group of young people or kids out to do a sport where you're having to explain everything, the time that it takes to explain things, and obviously the investment in one-on-one or having other people to help adds the dynamic, which again probably is one of the barriers for young people accessing sport.
We do a programme, it's called First Steps, and it's an early intervention programme. It's really simple. It's a pack with a ball with a bell in it, and then the pack helps the child roll the ball, kick the ball, catch it with their siblings or their friends, because often children with sight loss, and it's through no fault of anybody, brought into the fold to play because others aren't quite sure how to play with them. So this pack is that project that is specifically for families to show them how to do that with their peers, with their siblings and their friends. And the results that we've had have been amazing. It's not just about growing the child's confidence. We did a piece of research with a university up in Scotland, actually, and it came back that children had 42% more chance of being able to catch a ball, and I think it was 45% hop and jump. And, you know, people might ask, well, how is that related? It's because they've learnt and they're getting confidence. And there's lots of different things, you know, throwing, catching, all in the 40%, which I thought was fantastic. However, there was one thing that really gripped me, and that was there was 40% more chance to play alongside their peers. And actually, this gives their peers and their siblings a way of engaging with them that they may not have thought about otherwise. So, as you said, being sidelined is the natural way to go, but actually giving them something that they can do and say, oh, well, let's try that. They're absolutely going to engage in that activity with other people.
And that's a leveller as well, because then again, it's about what that child can do, not what they can't do.
Absolutely. And it also enables that peer, friend, sibling to have better empathy and total understanding. And they become adults with better empathy, don't they, for other people with disabilities.
And going back to what we were talking about earlier on, about access into the job place, often it's the lack of understanding, and it is the fear factor of being responsible for somebody, and it's the not knowing how. And that's why examples of how these things are possible are so important. And parasport is one way of showing people that we have many, many people out there with a disability, with a sight loss, whatever it is, who are highly capable individuals. Just give them a chance.
We've talked about progress, and you've obviously, in your role, seen a lot of progress. Do you think there's any other areas that could help people with disabilities be on a better equal footing? Do you think there's any other areas that we could put more emphasis? You've talked about visibility. Is there anything else that we could be doing?
I'm sure there are, but again, I think it's the workplace. Sorry to sort of beat on about this, but I think the workplace being given that opportunity. When I was young, you didn't really see people with a disability very often. Probably, funnily enough, is the most number of people that one of us saw was people with sight loss. But otherwise, and I think because our world wasn't very friendly for wheelchairs particularly, but also people were we still had a lot of institutions where people were placed, and access was a really big problem. I think actually over the years, certainly over my lifetime, I think things have changed profoundly. That's not to say that we don't have lots of people who don't feel that they do have access for lots of different reasons. But I think the world has changed, but the visibility still must remain strong. I mean, whenever we now see a sporting festival, the fact that we have our para-athletes being given as much profile, I would hope, as able-bodied, I think they have to tell their stories. I think people are naturally curious, and I've come across people over the years who don't want to talk about their disability, and I get that. But actually people are naturally curious, and to educate people about what it is like. So last week I was attending the Combined Forces Winter Sports, so it's basically the Army, Air Force and Navy, and they have their championships in winter sport. I cannot tell you, again, these young men and women who hurl themselves down mountains, some of them not having done it for very long. And I had the good fortune to spend the morning skiing with the para-athletes. And that was extraordinary. I've done it before and it's truly exciting. But being able to have the opportunity to talk to them about their disabilities and how they've had to adapt in order to access the sport was brilliant. So I would say it is about visibility, but it is also about being honest and telling the stories. Play to the natural curiosity that members of the public have, because if they understand how hard it is for somebody with some form of disability to access and want to carry out that sport, they will have so much pride in them, recognising the courage and the tenacity, and actually, to be quite honest with you, often the pain that people go through. Because if you're an amputee, I mean, there's one chap, he's called Swifty, he says he's not, but he rides a snowboard and he has a double amputee above the knee. He's extraordinary. And in fact, actually what the whole team now do is, they're a wonderful example. I'm completely in awe of them all. They now work not only with kids who've got disabilities, they're also trying to open out other opportunities as well for kids. They are amazing.
It's interesting because one of my questions today was really to talk about role models and how important you think it is to have role models in disability sport. We have the likes of people like Laura Fahy, who is our gold medal cyclist, who's obviously fantastic. But then you hear about people like Swifty that you've just talked about, who obviously does do a lot of sport, but then is going out and telling others people, look at me and look at what I can do. So do you think those stories around role models are just as important as the stories around elite athletes?
They absolutely are, because I remember, I think I was listening to a radio programme when they were talking exactly about the visibility and the role modelling. You've got to have role models at all levels. Yes. Of course, you want your superstars because you want people to dream and you want people to dream big. And we have got a lot of talented para-athletes out there in training who need to see that pull through. So we absolutely need these shining examples of elite sport. But moving down the scale, for many people, it's actually just seeing somebody like them doing something. And it doesn't need to be names in lights in order for that to inspire. If you imagine a child who's got a disability going to the local swimming pool and seeing another child with a disability that day and has never thought for 1 second that they would be able to get into a pool, that moment could provide a moment of change for them and a moment of inspiration and thinking, well, maybe I can try and do that. So it doesn't need to be the high level stuff. We need people at all levels to be role models and be examples and to encourage others to have those moments.
That moment when a child thinks that a person looks like me, or they're alongside somebody who they can identify with, regardless of whether somebody's got a disability or not, it's so important that we feel included as individuals. We see sport as building confidence and having fun, and there's always going to be that fun element. It's not just about elite sport, as you just said. Is there any sports that you particularly enjoy watching, other than goalball, obviously, or actually enjoy participating in?
I think we talked earlier on about wheelchair basketball, and I'm not sure I'm very good at participating in that, if I'm honest. Again, probably the skiing, because there are so many different levels of disability that are included in that sport. The other kind of sport, actually, I've suddenly remembered, is actually I like seeing dressage. And again, seeing somebody with a disability who is at one with their horse, and that brings in a whole different dynamic, because you've got to find an animal that has real empathy with the rider. Obviously at the elite level, seeing people competing at a very, very high level is extraordinary. But when you bring it down to grassroots...
We worked with Riding for the Disabled some time ago. We were teaching their coaches. I think we got over 500 centres across the UK. I think that's right, isn't it? We were teaching them how to support people with sight loss. And I went over to their new head office, which is not very far from our offices in Leamington Spa, actually, to meet their CEO. And we were putting together a training pack, and it was all about how to have a relationship with a horse for somebody with sight loss, because there is a lot of trust to be built there. And I remember when I went over to meet with them, I stepped out of my car in the car park, and then I realised that I walked over some grass, and then I walked over a gravel path, and then I was taken a bit later into the courtyard, which was all cobbled. And then I remember meeting the horses and being taken out into the paddock. And going back to our office, I said to the guys, it's not just about the horse and the horse riding here. In our job with people with sight loss, we've got to think about the terrain for somebody, because it's such a big step, and there's that confidence step to trying at any new sport, isn't there, to get along the line. So, pardon the pun, but that's even a bigger step than to getting actually onto the horse itself. But going back to what you were saying, once that relationship is built and somebody's sitting there and they're feeling they're in control of the animal, it must be a really wonderful feeling when you've sometimes felt quite lost.
Absolutely. And it's about a different kind of relationship. I'm another patronage, here we go. I'm patron of an organisation called Caring for Life. And it's a wonderful organisation based just outside Leeds, and it cares for people who have had lots of traumatic experiences. Many of them have got learning difficulties. And as part of the centre, they do a bit of carriage driving with some of the wheelchair-bound people. And in fact, actually, they have groups that come in from the outside. But they also have riding opportunities just around the little local area. But they have their clients working with the horses and caring for them, and I can tell you they are the most groomed horses on the planet, I think. But on one occasion, one of the founders, Peter, who's sadly no longer with us, they had a new client who had pretty much become mute. And they gave him this horse to care for. And so every day he was out there grooming the horse. And Peter used to go up and see him and say, "How are you getting on today? You're cared for, you're loved, you're safe. Nothing bad is ever going to happen to you again. I just want you to know that." And he didn't really ever get much response, if any. And over a period of days and weeks, he used to do the same thing again. And then eventually, one day, Peter went up and he started talking to the horse. And he would say to the horse, "Please tell this client he's loved and safe and he's cared for and he can trust us." And eventually, he suddenly heard this mumble come back from the other side of the horse's head, and he just said, "Tell him I'm fine." And Peter, he said it was, I know, I've cried so many times when I've been there, I can't tell you. And Peter, he said it was such a soft response, it was almost imperceptible. He wasn't sure if he'd actually heard it. And so he kept going up there, and he would talk to the horse and say to the horse, "Tell him this, tell him that." And over the course of a matter of weeks, he started communicating through the horse. And then a few months later, I went up to visit, and this chap was on stage with other clients doing this hilarious show, speaking and singing alongside all of his friends. And that was when Peter told me the story. He said, "You have no idea." And this is what the power of, I think, not only sport can do for people, it can bring them out of themselves where their world has shut them off, and it can give them opportunities to be who they want to be, but also particularly things like working with animals and seeing that communication that can form and that bond.
Your story reminds me, although it didn't have an animal in it, it's similar, it's on the same lines. Sometimes people call us and they don't really know where else to turn. A few years ago, a social worker called, and I often pick up the phone. I might be CEO, but I actually feel it's really important that I stay in touch with our community. And it just happened that I picked up the phone that afternoon. And this social worker said that she's got a lady who's lost her sight about a year ago, and quite suddenly, and she's now housebound. She's quite agoraphobic. She doesn't want to leave her home. And was there anything we could do? She said, "I don't know if she wants to do sport, but I've tried everything. I've tried local colleges, etc. And I really haven't got a clue how to help this lady." So I have a friend who just happened to be in the same town who is in our 10-pin team. So I said, is it okay if one of us comes around to meet her? And the person that would be coming around with somebody else with sight loss, do you think that would help? And the social worker said, we can but try, can't we? So I asked my friend with her husband to go around and meet the lady. So my friend went round. She went round almost just to go and have coffee first. And then they met and they had a chat. And she was able to demonstrate, going back to what I said earlier, meeting somebody else you can identify with. She was able to demonstrate that she had lost her sight quite suddenly as well, but she was having a very active life. And she then started to encourage this lady to participate and just slowly get involved. And it took a long time. It took well over 12 months for my friend and her husband to get her to come and even just go out for a walk. And then she went and tried the 10-pin. About 2 years on, unbeknownst to everyone else apart from myself and my friend who was also participating, I watched this lady at one of our 10-pin finals go up to the stage and be presented with a medal just alongside everybody else who achieved medals that day. And I knew the steps that she'd had to take to get there. And I was so, so proud of her. And that is why I do the work that I do, because it makes me feel very proud.
Absolutely. And probably formed a great bond with that person. And again, on the thing of animals, I mean, that's where the guide dogs, I think, are so amazing. The relationship that guide dog users have with their dogs is lovely. They're much more than a dog. And in fact, actually, they are a critical part of their life. They are a companion, they are a partner, they are their eyes, and obviously the dogs that actually are buddy dogs to children. So obviously some of the guide dogs don't go through to becoming guide dogs for whatever reason, but that doesn't mean to say that they're then put on the shelf. They're not. They are then used as companions for particularly young people with things like autism, and it changes their lives, and that bond is just extraordinary.
I'm not sure if people are aware, but if you do have a disability, you have a 1 in 5 chance of having another disability as well. So you may have sight loss, but you may also have autism. You might be in a wheelchair. You may have cerebral palsy. So any kind of relationship that you can have with an animal that gives you friendship and independence, or not just an animal, you know, a friend or whoever, then maybe that person with sight loss just doesn't feel like they're on their own.
Absolutely.
I really do appreciate how much time you've given us. I've just got a couple more questions. A favourite one of mine is, what one word or phrase that you feel best encapsulates the spirit of disability sport after everything that we've said today?
There's lots, really, but I think if I was to use one, I would say family.
That's a nice one.
The reason I'll justify that, if you go to any sporting festival around parasport, you get this incredible sense of family, because it takes a family often to get that person to where they are. And it's an investment by the whole family and by the community. But the feeling of atmosphere is slightly different to able-bodied sporting festivals. And it's a happy feeling because you are really there to celebrate their success. Because I think the journey that they've all been on is hard. And I know I'm talking about elite sport, but even at a lower level, even at grassroots sport, you get that same sense of family. And so I would say, for me, I would say the word family really encapsulates it.
You mentioned skiing a little bit earlier. We've actually got the Winter Paralympic Games coming up.
Yes.
So we may get lots of lovely new memories from this Games. Do you have a favourite memory of an athlete or sporting event that particularly inspired you? And it doesn't have to be in disability sport, actually. It can be any sport that you've gone, I'm never going to forget this moment.
Do you know, I'm so lucky. I have seen so many different sports and events over so many years that there isn't one particular moment. It would be wrong of me to single out any one particular moment. The only thing I would say, going back to winter sport, is many years ago, my husband and I attended the Snow Sport GB Championships and everything. They had the para skiers alongside the able-bodied. And we watched this amazing sit skier coming down doing the GS. and he got something slightly wrong and he took a massive tumble. And we all stood there slightly sort of holding our breath, and then the P-Sters came over and helped him up, and then he came down. And I remember going over to him later on and said to him, "That was quite a crash. Do you not think you should go and be checked out by the medical team?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry. As long as I haven't hurt myself any further above my paralysis, it doesn't really matter." And I was like, okay, fair enough. And he was completely kind of nonplussed by it, not worried about it. I was like, okay, well, there we are. The wonderful thing about parasport is it's an amazing leveller. The degree of humour, and often quite dark humour, that accompanies it. You have to experience it to really understand it. And it kind of puts you in your place, really, sometimes. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, it's just a minor scratch. And it's the same with the veterans. They've got such a can-do attitude. And it's like, yeah, whatever.
I'll share this story with you, and it's quite a funny one. So Sir Bobby Charlton, bless him, was a very good friend of mine, and I asked him to come to our five-a-side grassroots football for kids back in 2015, I think it was. So Sir Bobby and Lady Norma turned up, were wonderful all day, just giving lots of their time. But as you can imagine, all the mums and dads were trying to get photos with him. They were all very excited that, you know, such a sporting hero was present that day. And it was causing a bit of a furore, and some of the children were obviously thinking, who is this guy? So this little boy came up to him, and he was blind, and he was about 8, and he could see that there was a draw around Sir Bobby. And he said, "So who are you then?" And Sir Bobby said, oh, my name's Bobby. He said, "Why is everyone talking to you?" He said, "Well, it's because I used to play football." And he said, "Were you any good then?"
Sweet.
And Sir Bobby said, "Some people thought I was quite good." And the little boy went, "Oh, all right then." And he wandered off. And it was a leveller in a completely different way.
I just remembered one moment that actually I think will live with me forever. And this was when my children were at their primary school. Yeah. And there was a little girl who was brought in, and her name was Ellie. And she had multiple disability problems, and she walked often with a walker. She was at the school for a few years, and that child had a smile that lit the world up. She really did. And her family was so pleased that she was being included. And the children, what was really lovely was to see how the children really took her under their wing and looked after her. And this was I'm thinking she was probably just in reception at the time. And as the children went up the school, Ali stayed in reception. She wasn't able to progress, but she was a happy, happy child. And the day that School Sports Day happened, and we've talked about earlier on how so often children get sidelined, they were determined that Ellie was going to be participating. And so they had a running race. And Ellie also had a couple of little crutches that she was able to get around on. And they lined up, and of course everybody set off, and Ellie was still barely out of the starting blocks, and she was coming down. But I can tell you, all of the parents and it's going to make me want to cry.
That's okay.
Just watched her come down that running track, and it took her quite a while to get down. But everybody, with the biggest smile on her face you've ever seen, and everybody was just screaming and shouting for her, and it was the most lovely thing. And all of the children piling in on her when she came across the finishing line. It was quite lovely. And, you know, what should we be doing? We should be giving more children like Ellie that opportunity to be alongside their peers and to be celebrated by their peers. Because when it happens, it's great for everybody. Everybody wins. There are no losers.
And that's Ellie's family you talked about. Family.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Family of school. We're coming to the end of our year of celebration of 50 years at British Blind Sport. 50 years, I can't believe it. And we have so many years ahead of us. Do you have a message that you'd like to share with our members, our athletes, and our supporters and volunteers?
I would like to say thank you. Thank you for being the inspiration that you are, and to encourage you to continue to be that inspiration, to give others the opportunities that you have had.
Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for your time and for being so candid, honest and caring today.
Thank you.
Thank you to Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Edinburgh for joining us on today's very special episode of the Golden Legacy series. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. And if you did, please subscribe, leave a review and share with your family and friends.